Welcome to Econ 317. In this instruction video, we will go over a budget set with lifetime income. So here we are interested in a budget set which a typical worker will face over the lifetime, and we will divide the entire lifetime into two groups. So lifetime income consists of income while working. I'll call it first component. So let's write it as I1. And second, income, which is the person earns when retired. Income when retired. So I will use I0 for the income while working and I1 for the income when retired. So remember, the retired income would typically be the social security and the retirement savings which the person has made during the time period when he or she was working. And then we exclude the period of life which the person spends with the parents before the age of 18. So with this, we will like to look at budget sets where the agent, the consumer, derives utility from two consumptions. So two goods here are consumption when working. I will use notation C0, and then the second good is consumption when retired, and I will write it as C1. Okay, so let's look at a numerical example. The person has income available for consumption while working equal to, let's say, $100,000. So I will write it as 100K just to simplify notation. And also the agent has made savings such that has contributed to the social security, other retirement plans, such that the amount available for consumption when retired turns out to be $120,000. So now we want to look at the lifetime income, the budget set for this consumer, where the income when working 100K, income when retired, there was a typo, I1 120K. And then this is a simplified model, so I will assume the interest rate to hold constant at 20%. So this will be 0.20. And we want to find out the consumption set which this consumer, this agent can afford over the entire lifetime. Certainly, the consumer can afford to spend 100K while working and 120K when retired. So I will write it down. We will give it a name. We call it the consumer's endowment, which is the income while working I0 and income while when retired I1. So let's write it, the values we just assumed, 100k and 120k as available. So the consumer can always spend these two amounts in these specific periods, but consumer can choose many other consumption bundles. So before I go further, I will assign a symbol which is omega. This is not W, this is the Greek letter omega, which is typically used for endowment. So now going back, what other options the consumer can have is to look at the possibility of consumer going to a bank and either taking a loan against the future income to spend more amount while working. That's one possibility. We know consumer has 120k as future income, could borrow against that future income. Alternately, consumer can decide to save money while working so that and put it in a bank account where it will generate interest income to spend more than the retirement income when consumer is retired. So with these two possibilities, now we want to look at the extreme situation by supposing that consumer wants to borrow to the maximum limit and spend all the money when he or she is working. So for that, we will see consumer and borrow knowing that 120k is the future income and the interest rate is 20%. So I'll write 120k over 1 plus r, which is 0.20 and which is received at 1 year from today. So this is the present value of the future income which the consumer can use to borrow for higher consumption while working. And so if you do the math, this will turn out to be 100k. So consumer can borrow 100k when working out of the retirement income as repayment. This is one possibility, which means the maximum amount the consumer can spend while working, C0, is the 100k, which is the income, plus another 100k, which is the loan, which needs to be repaid in when retired, and interest rate is 20%. So that can be done given the fact that the consumer earns 120k. So the maximum amount the consumer can spend while working is 200k. I will go to the other extreme and look at the maximum amount the consumer can spend when retired, and that will happen in the case that the consumer keeps all the money in a savings account while working and earns the interest plus the principal when when he or she has retired, and that will give us the maximum amount for consumption. So C1 will be 120k, which is the income, and the 100k which he has earned as while working multiplied by 1 plus r 0.20, and that's the amount the consumer can get when retired by saving all the income while he is working. So this turns out to be, so this is the savings. 120k plus 100k times 1.20 is also 120k. So if I add this up, I get 240k. Now we are ready to draw the budget set. I will have C0 consumption while working on the horizontal, C1 consumption when retired on the vertical. And let me draw the budget set, which will turn out to be a straight line with 240k as the vertical intercept, 200k as the horizontal intercept. But remember, there is this endowment, which is the number driving these extreme consumption values. So 100k when working, 120k when retired. And I have said before, we will use notation omega as the endowment. So 100k here, 120k the future income, and this gives us the budget set. Remember, in this situation, out of simplification, I had assumed the interest rate for borrowing as well as saving to be exactly same 20%. But that's not realistic. Typically, we earn very little income on savings, so interest rate is extremely small when we have a savings account, money saved in a savings account, whereas the interest rate on loans are typically way higher. So let's assume, again I will assume numbers which are whole numbers and for ease of computation, but I will assume lower interest rate for savings, higher interest rates for borrowing. So let's say savings interest rate to be 10%. So this is 0.10, and the loan, or I should have called borrowing interest rate, to be 20%, which was same as before. With this, now I will draw the budget set, the lifetime income budget set for this consumer in the same format. So C0 on the horizontal axis, C1 on the vertical axis. Remember, I have not changed the borrowing interest rate. So the maximum value of current consumption the consumer can afford is 100k. This is the current income plus 120k divided by 1.20. That's the amount the consumer can spend by taking out a loan against future income, given the interest rate to be 20%. So what I got, 100k plus 100k, so 200k. No change here. All that changes is the C1, where I know 120k is the income the consumer receives when retired, plus now the savings of 100k from the working age income could generate an after interest income of 100 plus times 1 plus 0.10. You remember the interest rate on savings is 10%. That gives me 120k first term. The second term is 100 times 1.10, turns out to be 110k, which leads us to 230k as the maximum amount the consumer can afford when retired. So now I'm able to, we are ready to draw the budget set. So let's go again. C1 on the vertical, C0 on the horizontal, C1 on the vertical, C0 on the horizontal, and we know that the endowment is always available. So 120k, future income 100k, current income is always available. The maximum consumption in current time is at the when the consumer borrows at 20%. So that turns out to be 200k. And so this is the consumption set when the consumer is borrowing against future income. Now, the second aspect is when the consumer is saving part of the current income to consume more than the income when retired, and that number we saw was 230k. So the consumption set will now look like this. There is a change in slope at the endowment, which is 100k current income, 120k future income, and this is the more realistic part. I don't want to say this is exactly realistic because interest rate for savings I have assumed to be 10%. Typically it should be of the order of 1%. You can go back and look at the current savings interest rates offered by different financial institutions and would find those rates are similar, closer to 1% rather than 10%. So this is the budget set for the consumer who is facing a lifetime income. You can see in this segment the consumer is borrowing. Against future income. In this segment, consumer is saving from the current income. Again, with the idea of consuming more when retired. And this is a good point to stop.